Hi, everybody. This is Rick Lenz, actor, author, playwright, and you are listening to Annie Talks.
Annie Talks, Annie Talks. Welcome to the show. Here we go with Annie Talks. Annie Talks, Annie Talks. Welcome to the show. Here's the host, it's Annie Talks.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Annie Talks, where we bring to you interesting stories about interesting people that you want to know about. I'm your host, Annie Rivera. Thank you for tuning in, and to those who have already subscribed. If you're new to the podcast, welcome, and I hope you enjoy what you hear, and if so, I personally invite you to subscribe. Annie Talks is brought to you by Daily Gadgets and More. Daily Gadgets and More is proud and committed to offering the largest variety of high-quality products at the lowest prices and the best customer service. Find us on Instagram or visit dailygadgetsandmore.com. That's dailygadgetsandmore.com. Hey everybody, my next guest on the show is an actor, author, and playwright extraordinaire. And just to give you an idea of how seasoned a performer he has acted alongside super greats such as Peter Sellers, Walter Matthau, Lauren Bacall, Elizabeth Taylor, John Wayne and Goldie Hawn, among many, many others. He has written a successful string of plays from Off-Broadway to PBS and now into books. 2 books in particular, North of Hollywood, An Actor's Stumbling Baby Steps Toward Kindness and Peace, and 2, The Alexandrite, a time travel noir. I'm super excited for all of you to hear my interview with Rick Lenz. And so without further ado, let's get started. Here now is my conversation with Rick Lenz. Well, hello, Rick. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'm so honored to have you on my show.
Oh, thank you, Annie. It's a pleasure to be here. I can't tell you. It's a beautiful day here, and I just had a little more coffee to make me just smarter than I ever was before, and I'm ready to go.
Awesome. So you just heard that wonderful intro. Why don't you fill in a little bit of some of the gaps and give a snapshot of who you are, the journey that led to the journey that led you as an entertainer up to who the Rick Lenz is today.
Okay. Well, I was going to be a doctor when I went to college in Michigan, the University of Michigan, and my father was a doctor, and we kind of. My mother mostly thought that it would be a nice idea if I joined his practice. He was an eye, ear, nose, and throat specialist. But I saw him do a couple of procedures, and I fainted both times. And so I decided to drop out of pre-med. And I'd already been doing summer stock, so I just kept on doing that. And then I joined the theater department at the University of Michigan. And when I got done, I got a job directing the Civic Theater in the town where I came from. That was just a lucky thing. I didn't know what I was going to do with myself because nothing's much more useless than a theater degree, just all by itself, hanging out there lonely.
Yeah.
And I got this offer, and I spent 2 years doing that. And I thought, well, I either go back and become a teacher, or I go to New York and try to do what I thought I could, hoped I could. There was never that much confidence in me in the first place. But when I got to New York, I started doing stuff that I started to, study with various wonderful teachers, and I got into the actor studio, and I worked a lot, and then it just took off. I had a lot of, those jobs that everybody has in between. I saw that I had written down a list here somewhere previously of the things that I did to make a living, because I frankly forget. They just went by so fast. But I was I was a substitute teacher for a while. I was a file clerk, a hotel night clerk. I passed out circulars. I cleaned up city parks. I worked as an MC for IBM at the World's Fair the last year of it, and that was fun. And I got to come down on this little one-man elevator in front of what they called the people wall, and there were 400 people on that wall. And I do 10 shows a day doing that, and then I'd go up into the theater on my own, and I'd pop out between screens, and it was a multimedia kind of thing. It was great fun. But then I had to quit that a little early because I got my first job in a Broadway show, so I took that, and geez, I'm starting to bore. Talking about yourself as many times as I have for as long as I have, you get to. I was doing a show at the Michigan Theater. It was a great old theater, and last year, and I remember saying, "And there I am with," and there I am, and I suddenly found myself saying, "And then there's that guy with John Wayne, and there's somebody else," and so anyway, you must know how that feels.
Well, I mean, I do have an entertainment background, so I mean, I'm not as seasoned as you, and as world renowned as you, but I know from coming from the entertainment background, there's, you gather up stories and all these wonderful. I love behind the scenes stuff. So in all your many years in entertainment, could you share with us what has been what has been the highlight of your career?
Well, I think the first real highlight was when I first got in the theater department at Michigan, and they were going to do the first amateur production of Look Homeward Angel, which had won a Pulitzer Prize, I think, the year or two before. And I went and saw the play. It was being done in New York, and I basically memorized the role for the audition, which is kind of a no-no, but I didn't know any better at the time, so I did that, and then I got the part. And I remember after the first read-through of that play, my wonderful professor, a woman named Clarabelle Baird, said, "Intuition is not enough, Ricky." And I knew what she meant. She knew I needed to develop a little craft to be a good actor. You said you were in entertainment. Have you been an actor too?
Well, right out of high school, I went straight into Performing Arts University in San Diego. So I have singing, acting, dancing in that order. And I've done musical theater kind of locally here in Southern California.
Yeah.
So yes, I've been on the stage. I had some leading roles and mostly supporting roles and whatnot in ensemble. But yes, I absolutely enjoy it. I wish I could go back to it. It's just
sometimes me too. There are times when I reach a little bit of a writer's block or whatever that really breaks down to being, and think, I wish I was on stage where I just have to do it, get through it, and see if people like it. Hope they will, and then I'm done, and then I can go have a beer or whatever I do.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about what happened during that time when she says that your professor says you need a little bit more.
Well, it was a role that it was really it fit me like a glove. I think Tony Perkins did it on Broadway, and I was kind of his type in those years, and it had a lot of emotion in it. And I'd had a kind of an emotional sort of a relationship with my mother, who was a volatile person. My father was wonderful, so was my mom, but she was volatile. And I remember I'd done a Glass Menagerie, Tennessee Williams play, and that was another character who ends up yelling at his mother in the play. And my mother said to me after about the second or third time I'd done one of these, she said, "Why do you always get these roles where you're yelling at your mother?" And I said, "I don't know, Mom."
I don't know, Mom.
Haven't a clue. It just worked out that way.
Oh my goodness. You have quite the resume now. As we mentioned earlier, you've starred alongside Peter Sellers, Walter Matthau, Lauren Bacall, Elizabeth Taylor. For all these millennials who don't know who these iconic actors are. Go look them up, Google them. They're just,
Sure.
they're the pivotal of entertainers and actors, and even John Wayne and, of course, Goldie Hawn. Now, could you share some of the memorable moments behind the scenes? I love behind the scenes. So,
Sure.
share something that behind the scenes story about being on set with one of them. I mean, what stands out?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, one which has come up a couple of times that I'm familiar with it, having mentioned it before, is a scene I had with John Wayne in The Shootist, which was his final film, and I was in it too with my friend Richard Boone, whom I'd done a television series with called Heck Ramsey.
Mm.
Anyway, there was a scene with Duke where he hits me on the back of the head and he puts a gun in my mouth.
Oh,
And in fact, I once saw this. I was watching an Academy Award, and it was the year of Brokeback Mountain, and I saw, in the middle of this, they were doing cuts of kind of, what can I say, sort of double entendre sort of things that had to do with westerns, and it was meant to be humorous, and it was. And I looked up and I saw this. There I was with this great huge pistol stuck in my mouth. Well, when we were filming that, toward the end of it, Lauren Bacall comes down and then John Wayne backs me out the door and he hits me in the back of the head. Well, he had this great big handgun. I don't know what kind it was, but it was huge. And he hit me with it, and they had to take a few stitches. I had to go to the hospital afterwards.
Oh.
And I saw him about a week later, and he said, "Well, I only ever did that once before." I think he felt bad, and he was not at his strongest at that moment.
Right.
He'd been through a lot, and he was not well. He'd been in the hospital for a couple of weeks while they were shooting that. So anyway, yeah, that was fun. And,
oh my goodness, what a story! Oh, I love these stories. Do you have another one that you can share with us? Just one more.
Yeah. Well, let me think. I was on set with Peter Sellers doing a film that's I just saw recently, was on Amazon Prime, I think, and I was once waiting to do a shot, and Peter was in it. And I was looking off another direction, and I heard Michael Caine behind me, and we were shooting in a hospital in Culver City, and we had the 5th floor dedicated to the shooting of this film, and but the rest of the hospital was still functioning as a hospital. And the phone rang, and I heard it being answered by Michael Caine. And I thought, well, what is Michael Caine doing here? And he said, I heard him say something like this. He said, "Oh, now look at what you," and I'm not saying it like Michael Caine would, because I can't do that. He said, "Look what you've done. You've made me sever this poor man's aorta." And so I looked around, and Michael Caine was not there. It was Peter Sellers doing Michael Caine.
Oh.
And I'm sure the poor people on the whatever floor that were, concerned were just, really abashed that they'd been responsible for a surgical death.
Oh my goodness. How fun. I love these. These are the nuggets that I absolutely love. And, as a musical theater, enthusiast as well as a performer, I recently, started these behind the scenes, and, not that I'm responsible for behind the scenes, but I started behind the scenes kind of, stories, and I would go and talk to some of the leads or some of the production crew and whatnot. And I love that they share these stories. So, oh my gosh, I'm going to chalk these into my storybook. I had this conversation with Rick Lenz and he said this. And so, thank you so much for sharing that. It's just treasure. I love it. I
have a quick dumb story. I don't really know if it's. Yeah. I've never told it before, but it was in San Diego. I was doing Harvey a long time ago, and I was doing Elwood, and I came into the theater one night, and I had this little gag I used to do. It wasn't a gag; it was dumb. I had a deck of cards, and I'd say, "Name a card, any card," and there were a bunch of people there, people in the cast. and they would say 3 of spades, and then if I drew out the queen of diamonds, I'd say 3 of spades, queen of diamonds. Well, I did this one night, and somebody said, for example, 4 of clubs, and I said 4 of clubs, 4 of clubs, and I just pulled out the 4 of clubs just by utter accident.
Right.
And somebody said, do it again, and I thought, well, why not? So they said, somebody said, I'm making the card up, Jack of diamonds, and I said, Jack of diamonds, and I reached in and I pulled out the Jack of diamonds.
Oh my goodness.
I'd done that I don't know what the odds are against that, but anyway, I did that twice in a row, and somebody said, again? I said, nope, never again. That's my farewell performance doing that trick. So these people believed that.
What
it was
a
terrible.
coincidence. Oh, you're so
Yeah, it sure was.
I bet you were a hoot on set and just, behind the scenes on stage. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall and just to see you in action.
I don't know. Sometimes I was so concerned about myself and, how I was coming across and all that kind of thing that you get, how it happens to performers. You can get, into, watching yourself and what you're doing. And a lot of times it's to your detriment that happens, but it does happen sometimes. And
yep, that's very true. So now,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say I had an experience with Alan Alda. I did a play with him in New Hope, Pennsylvania, a long time ago, and it was called Sunday in New York. Okay. And Alan had just finished studying with Paul Sills, who was the son of Viola Spolin, who pretty much Paul Sills really invented Second City, which is, as you know, is the progenitor of so much of what's where our actors come from in the last. Anyway, Alan was very much under that influence, and we used to do theater games and stuff afterwards. And I don't know what my point is, except I'd had a lot of experience with acting, teaching, and so on. Everything was kind of structured between the lines and everything. And very often, acting, when it's at its best, as long as you know your lines, in most plays, as long as you, and the lines are worth sticking to, as long as you know your lines, you're best when you're free and able to bat off the walls or whatever it's called for. And so that was the best teaching I'd ever had, was to study improv. And I did it with Alan, the whole cast in that show did it. We went back to New York afterwards, and we kept on having these meetings, and we just play theater games. It was a wonderful experience.
Oh, I love that. That's so nice. I could sit here and talk to you all day.
I'd be happy to.
But we don't have all day. So
I know.
So now, as of the three, you're an actor, author, and now a playwright. Of the three, which do you like best, and why?
Well, I got to tell you, that's a matter of time in my life. When I was young, I don't think, I realized looking back, I don't think anything could have kept me off the stage. I just loved it.
Right.
But I think every actor has kind of a career track that they're somehow, this is not a rule by any means, I know, but there's kind of a blueprint that lays itself out. There are certain people who are not going to fall under the heading of great character actors, and I think I was one of those. I mean, I could keep on working, but I didn't like the roles as time went on. And since I'd started writing when I was directing that civic theater I told you about, I'd just write plays, and I was first a playwright before I started writing books, and I had one done. I had one done in 1969, and it was called Swung, and it was 3 one-acts, and I'd really written it having watched the 1968, I'm dating myself, the 1968 Democratic Convention, and I had friends who were there protesting, and I watched, Mayor Daley's troops, as it were, kind of not being fair in the way they were treating these people. So I kind of wrote what was an angry young man, which was, all the rage from John Osborne and so on at the time from England. And it was kind of one of those sort of things. Well, when that play of mine, Swung, opened in New York, it got a front page review in the communist paper. Well, I was raised in Jackson, Michigan, which, among other things, calls itself the birthplace of the Republican Party, and I was, raised kind of under that influence to some degree. And so the last thing in the world I was when I was that age was a communist. Imagine how surprised I was to see that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
And then after that, I had a play done on PBS that was done off-Broadway called The Epic of Buster Friend. And that was great fun. But I still considered myself an actor, and that's what I wanted to do. And then I started realizing that some of my plays might be better if they could have a little narrative to them. Yeah. And so about 15 years ago, I started writing my memoir and novels, and now I just it's the most pleasurable thing I can imagine doing, because I can get up in the morning and have my coffee and just go to work, and nobody tells me louder, faster, whatever they say.
Hilarious. I hope you're enjoying this podcast episode. We'll be right back after this short message from one of our sponsors. Comfotherm thermal wraps are designed to help relieve the pain and swelling in and around the jaw, especially after wisdom teeth extractions. For more information, visit comfotherm.com. That's comfotherm.com. Hey there, Annie Rivera here. Thanks for tuning in to Annie Talks. Be sure to tell your friends about subscribing to the podcast, and don't forget to rate and review the podcast. Doing so helps out with the algorithm and helps others to find this podcast too. I also invite you to like my Annie Talks Facebook page. There you'll find other news, information, upcoming events, and all sorts of things. Stay in the know with Annie Talks. I also invite you to join the Annie Talks Community Facebook group, where we carry the conversation from the podcast episode to the Facebook group. Ask questions about the episode, about a guest, about the locations, you name it. Ask away. This forum is for you. See you on the Annie Talks Community Facebook group. So speaking of which, let's talk about those some of the books. And now the two that I want to focus on are the first one is The North of Hollywood, an actor's stumbling baby steps toward kindness and peace. Tell us about what that is, or what that's about, and what inspired you to write it, and what you write it. Yeah,
I had already written, or was partway through anyway, my first two novels, and then I thought. Maybe I should take some time out and just write my own experience in the theater and movies and so on, television, because it was kind of, it was very broad, and it also had in it kind of a moment when I realized that I might be better off writing. And I had written a play called Last Class about a professor who's fired for unseemly behavior. He kind of makes a pass, I guess you could say, at no, he doesn't really. It just looks that way, at the president of the university and his wife's daughter, and it's an embarrassing moment, and he's fired almost on the spot. And then he has one more class before he lets go. Well, he goes to the class and says everything that's on his mind, which was great fun to write, because I could just say anything I felt like saying. And but one of the things that happens is toward the end of that play, the lead character, which is the only character in that one, finds himself, he just takes off his clothes and walks off onto the campus naked with his briefcase, covering anything that the audience might see. Right. And I realized that part of me was looking at kind of what my acting career felt, in a sense. I had been reduced to, which was, standing alone naked, waiting for, the winds of fortune to come my way and blow something, that kind in my direction. And that was sort of a crossing point there. And by that time, I also was married to my final wife. I'd been married twice before, and had that's where I got that subtitle, which I used for a while, called On North of Hollywood. And you know, I was frankly a really self-involved actor at the beginning, and then I began to realize that that's not such a good thing to be. You know, the acting part's fine, but the self-involved part is not. And then I married. Well, when I married Linda, we've been married for almost coming on 40 years, and it's a great marriage, and because she's a really nice woman. I remember when I was looking for, I was finally saying, okay, it's ready. I'm ready to settle down now and do it right this time. And somebody said to me, why don't you go to a church group and meet somebody that way? And I thought, well, come on, I'm not going to do that. That sounds really corny. And then I got away from that person, and I realized what they'd meant by that advice, which was, why don't you just consider looking for somebody who's not just physically attractive, that's nice and everything, but for somebody who's nice. By the way, my wife is beautiful, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I wanted to find a nice person, and I've spent my life with this very nice woman, and it makes you nicer to hang out with nice people.
Ah, that's so nice. So now, okay, let's talk about your second book, The Alexandrite, a time travel noir. What is that? And what inspired you to write that?
Well, I was working at a small theater, the same one where I did Last Class the first time, and it was run by three lovely women who, did everything involved with producing and directing and running the theater, and I decided to write a play that the three of them would have a part in, and naturally one for myself, and so I did, and then it worked out that theater went away, as theaters do sometimes, and so I was left with this story, which I liked a lot, and I decided to put it into novel form. But in the story, the guy gets sent back to the mid-50s. Well, he's then kind of like two personae. He's the actor that he was, and he's also this gemologist. Where comes the title Alexandrite, which is a multifaceted, multicolored.
That's my birthstone.
Oh, is it really? You're June, aren't you?
I'm June, yeah.
Yep.
Awesome.
Well, that's one of the reasons I picked Marilyn Monroe, partly because she was doing a movie at that time, and I could use that as a backdrop for a story. And then I started to do a lot of research on Marilyn, and I, even though I know as an actor, I can understand how some people had difficulty with her, but she was also an extraordinarily gifted performer, really gifted. If you look at her stuff again, I remember Billy Wilder, who directed her in 7-Year Itch and Some Like It Hot, was asked after Marilyn moved on, as it were, he was asked why he's not doing those comedies anymore. He said, there's no Marilyn. And he had lots of trouble with her, but he also recognized that she was as gifted at the kind of work that she did as anybody.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's why she got to be in that book, and so it's a mystery, and I think it's people have responded very positively to it. So it's been exciting, and I intend to keep holding that one up in the air and saying, look for the rest of my life.
Yeah. So now where can we find these two books?
You can find them at all the online bookstores, Amazon or Barnes & Noble, all of them. They aren't in a lot of bookstores currently, and I can't even exactly tell you what. Not many at the moment, but I'm hoping as my new one, Impersonators Anonymous, I just held it up to a camera that isn't there. My new one, which has a picture of James Dean on the front of it, which is basically about the completion or the journey to complete a half or 2/3 completed film that was then lost for years, that starred John Wayne and James Dean together. And the same thing with Impersonators Anonymous. All three of them are available on, excuse me for pushing that one, though you didn't mention it.
No, not a problem. What's the name of it? We'll push it. What's the name of it?
Okay. Okay. It's Impersonators Anonymous.
Okay.
And it's got yeah, that's it.
Impersonators Anonymous, and you talk about John Wayne and Jimmy Dean, or James
Dean,
okay.
And Richard Boone is a character in it also, and who else? I don't think anybody else much that you're all familiar with.
No worries. I'd love to take a look at that as well. So everybody just take, I'll have all the information in the show notes below. You'll for all three books that Rick just mentioned. Now, Rick, tell us something about Rick people don't already know.
I did mention this in North of Hollywood, but I was in the only play that the Gabor sisters ever did together.
Really?
Ava and Zsa Zsa, and this was in Chicago, and they did Arsenic and Old Lace, and I was the Cary Grant character, and John Carradine was the Boris Karloff character, or I guess that was Raymond Massey in the movie. And so, lots of good people. Jane Merrow, who was in Lion and Winter, was in it. And it was a wonderful cast, except that it was a very odd and volatile pairing of Zsa Zsa and Ava playing the Daffy sisters in that. And they made them one generation younger because egos wouldn't allow them to be the actual ages that the playwright had written. And so at the beginning, there was some kind of in the other room, it was the director, the producer, and Zsa Zsa and Ava, kind of evening out the lines and fighting over who should have which line. And so it's a bit of a violation of the playwrights,
right,
conventions. But anyway, that was fascinating. One time there was an episode on stage. It was rehearsal, and Ava had fainted. And they called the paramedics, and the paramedics came, and we all heard. We were kind of all looking from the side, from the audience. The guy with his microphone talking to whatever the controlling center is. He said, "Middle-aged woman." Well, right there, you were in big trouble with either of the Gabor sisters. None of them could ever be called middle-aged.
That's right.
And it turned out that Zsa Zsa, if I've got this, yes, it was Zsa Zsa, had bought a bunch of clothing at one of the Chicago department stores, and a lot of stuff, and charged it to Ava, and Ava, hearing the news, passed right out. Yeah.
That must have been one expensive bill.
yeah, it was expensive.
Goodness. Those two, how funny, how nice. I love that. That's so thank you for sharing that. I feel so privileged to have known that, or to have heard that from you, so I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. I love telling these stories. You don't get it. I can tell them to my wife just so often, and Linda gets, she has an off switch on me, which she flips from time to time when she's doing something of her own.
What words of wisdom can you share with aspiring actors and authors and playwrights? Someone who wants to be like Rick Lenz. What can you share with them?
Let me see. Whenever possible, learn the easy way instead of the hard way. I remember when I was very young, I had to go against whatever the rules were, whatever the boundaries were. I stepped over them, and you've got to. From my point of view, it's important to realize that there are sometimes those rules and boundaries and kind of what's gone before are worth paying attention to because they're smart. And I only got to be a writer that I'm beginning to think well of when I started to listen to other writers' advice, especially, the best writers you can pay attention to. And that's really important. I think another thing I would say for any of the arts is that whichever one you may be pursuing, it's really of value to keep an eye on the others, and if not dabble in them, become aware and knowledgeable. When I lived in New York, I used to do kind of almost a jog through the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it was good for exercise. It was good. It's a huge place, and it was good for seeing all that art and getting a chance to go when I was in New York to go to the opera or whatever it is. See musical performance, plays, everything. It's just, I think it's really of great value to keep your thumb. And I do painting. I'm not a great painter by any means, but I'm fearless, which makes it better than I would be otherwise. When I was a kid, I was told, no, you shouldn't draw. You shouldn't be an artist. You can't draw. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think it necessarily matters. Sometimes it does, but art takes a lot of forms, and so whatever you feel like doing, I think is worth pursuing. And then if you don't,
So it sounds like learn it the easier way, and then also be well-rounded in all arts. Yeah. Awesome. I love that. And then
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think it's a good thing to have, back to the boundaries thing. It's a good to have respect for the boundaries, but it's also a good thing to be a little skeptical of them too, because
of course. Yeah.
I
love that. Thank you. So, and then where can our listeners and our followers follow you on social media? Do you have social media?
Well, I'm on Facebook. I started that a number of years ago, and I like that. And I'm doing Twitter now. I'm not yet gifted at it. We've just started. My wife and I, Linda's helping me. We're doing Instagram, and that's just starting. And
awesome.
And it's fun. And I just had a YouTube interview that I did with a man named Rob Ward. It was called Ward on Westerns, and it was at the Gene Autry Museum out here in L.A. or up here in L.A. from where you are, I guess.
Yeah.
And it was an interview about John Wayne and done a few months ago, and that is kind of fun, I think. I saw it and didn't hate myself. That's always good.
Well, I will have all the information to Rick's social media down below in the show notes, everybody. So be sure to check him out and to follow him. Rick, thank you so much for being on the show. I really, truly appreciate it. And I'm telling you, because, from one thespian to another, it's definitely refreshing to hear, the stories of behind the scenes, and then just, my goodness, just the resume that you have, and just to be kind of in the know of what you've done, and and the respect that I have for you, and for all that you've done and all that you've accomplished in your life. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a treat for me to do this, and I know I will be scolded by a couple of people if I don't mention my website, which is ricklenz.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much.
Well, that's it, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Annie Talks and learning about Rick Lenz. I really enjoyed listening to his stories, especially all the behind-the-scenes stories. And if you know me, I love behind-the-scenes stories. Now, don't forget to follow Rick Lenz on social media. I will have all his information down below in the show notes, so be sure to check it out. Now, before we go, if you haven't already subscribed to my podcast, I invite you to hit subscribe and be notified anytime we upload a a new episode. If you would please leave a comment or two, it would really surely help me out, and it will help others to find this podcast too. Now, if you enjoyed this podcast, please consider supporting it at anchor.fm/AnnieTalks. That's anchor.fm/AnnieTalks. You can follow Annie Talks on social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat. I will have all the information down below in the show notes as well, so be sure to check it out. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and keep listening to Annie Talks.
Hi, everybody. This is Rick Lenz, actor, author, playwright, and you are listening to Annie Talks.